Good morning, everybody. We are very excited to have you. We're just going to take a few moments, let people sign in, just give them a little bit of time here, a minute after the hour, in order to get their technology turned on and into this webinar. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We'll buy ourselves just a few more minutes, actually a few more seconds. How about that? And we'll get kicking off here. Okay. All right, well, good morning, everybody. We are so glad to have you here. We are particularly excited to be doing this webinar in joint with one of our partners, Wistic. And we've got a lot of energy and excitement about what's going on in this partnership and are very excited to chat with you today. We do want you to participate in the Q&A. So let's just deal with a couple of logistics so that you can do that. So some general housekeeping here. You will have a toolbar pane available to you. You can minimize, maximize, and be able to open up a question or chat panel. So you will see to the right there an opportunity to put in your questions or chat. There's not a huge difference between the two. Just know that we will be watching both and do our best to reply and get to those questions at the end during our open Q&A time. If for any reason we don't get to a question, we have that recorded and we will do our best to get back to you and connect with you to get questions answered if we don't get to them in the webinar. Make sure that you are aware of which way you're logged in, whether you're calling in through a phone or your computer. So just kind of check your settings on that. And today we do have CPE available. So one of the requirements here to get CPE, make sure you are using a personal computer, logging in with your own unique identifier. This, you must be logged in for at least 50 consecutive minutes. So stick with us. Like I said, we're gonna have Q&A, we'll have some polling questions. So stick with us to that, to the end so that you can really get the most out of this and qualify for CPE. You must respond to 75% of the polling questions. So we have 4 polling questions for you today. So make sure you get 3 of the 4. We'd love you to go for 100, 4 or 4. We want to see what's going on with you guys. And then make sure you complete the evaluation survey at the end of the webinar. That should automatically be opened up in a window for you as you close out of the webinar. If I've got that wrong, I don't think I do, but it'll also be emailed to you. So make sure you complete that survey in order to qualify for CPE. All right, so today we are going to identify procedures for faster and more accurate vendor security reviews, integrate new techniques and methodologies into your security programs, establish a repeatable process to reduce costs, and simplify assessments. We know lots is going on in the space, and we are very excited to have our panelists and everybody here to participate and conversate. So let's kick off. Couple polling questions here. So polling question 1, it's going to pop up on our screen here in a minute. Let's see here. I am having a little bit of a technical difficulty. Poll must be closed to enable screen sharing. So is it on the screen, Brian?
Yes.
It's on. Yep.
It's on.
All right. So Vishal, can you read it? Because my screen is not allowing me to see it.
Definitely. So guys, the first polling question is, do you currently assess your vendor security posture? And the options are yes, no, and not applicable. So we'll give some time for everyone to answer this question.
All right, give us the results, Vishal.
Yeah, so based on the results, we have yes, which says yes, we currently assess your vendor, which is 79%, as opposed to the audience saying no, which is 16%, where they are not currently assessing their vendor security posture. And we have 5% who have marked this as not applicable based on their control environment or company posture.
That's great. So that's wonderful news, and we are excited to help with those that answered no. So we're excited that you're here. All right, let's kick off into the second polling question. And go ahead, Vishal, and read that for me again.
Yeah. So the second polling question is, how are you assessing your vendors? The options are, number one, we are not assessing our vendors and we are accepting the risk. Option two, we do it ourselves manually. Option three is we do it ourselves and leverage a software tool. The fourth option is we are outsourcing the work. And the last option is it's not applicable for us. Again, we'll give some time for everyone.
Yep, and we're certainly curious to see what our audience is doing. We know that a lot is changing and shifting, and everyone is getting through it different ways. So this will be fun to see how you are handling it.
Perfect. We're almost toward the end of everyone's response. So there you go. So the maximum vote goes to we do it ourselves on a manual basis. And then the second highest is we do it ourselves and leverage a software tool. The third is we are not currently assessing our vendor and we are accepting the risk. And we are also outsourcing the work. And none of them said not applicable.
All right. Very interesting. Thank you so much. Closing the polls there. That was fantastic. Good to learn about. All right, so I'm going to kick it over to Vishal. That's all of the housekeeping and kind of introductions. Vishal's going to take it from here. I hope you all enjoy the rest of the webinar, and I'll be on, of course, monitoring certain things and helping out. Enjoy your time.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you, Larkin, so much for all your help. Appreciate all your help over here. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar that focuses on how to attain speed and efficiency for vendor security reviews. By way of introduction, my name is Vishal Madhok, and I'm the manager in the Risk Advisory and Assurance Service line at Armanino, with expertise in vendor risk management, SOC, SOX, and cybersecurity audit. And I'm very excited to be a part of today's panel discussion. So without any further ado, joining this panel discussion today, we have with us Liam Collins, partner in charge of RAS practice at Armanino, Nick Sorensen, CEO of Wistic, and John Finizo, director of Wistic as well. Now let's start with a quick round of introduction. Liam, would you like to go first?
Happy to. Thank you, Vishal. And thank you, everybody, for joining. I'm Liam Collins. As Vishal said, I'm a partner in charge of our Armanino's risk assurance and advisory practice. I've been doing this for almost 20 years. I focus personally on vendor risk management, SOC 2 reports, and Sarbanes-Oxley. The practice I cover also covers cybersecurity, data privacy. We do lots of SOC 1 reports and automation as well. So very excited to be here today to talk about this very important topic, both for the customers and for the vendors that they're dealing with. So thanks, guys.
Perfect. Thank you, Liam. Nick, would you like to go next?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Excited to be here. My name is Nick Sorensen. I'm the CEO of Wistic. We'll do a brief introduction of Wistic in a minute, but we're neck deep in this vendor security challenge for both the buyers and the sellers for the past 5 years, thinking of ways that we can innovate around this topic of speed and efficiency. So really excited to be with you today.
Perfect. Thank you, Nick. Last but not the least, John.
Thanks, Vishal. Again, John Finizo, Director of Partner Success here at Wistic. Like Liam, spent a number of years in the third-party risk space in a number of different roles, risk, audit, product, and most recent customer or partner success. So it's an interesting perspective I bring from all the different stakeholders, which is pretty valuable. So have kind of seen it from every angle along the way. So excited to talk about speed and efficiency on the assessment side.
Great, great. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us in today's panel discussion. So let's go back to the slide. And now let's talk about Armanino and Wistic. So Liam, would you like to give a quick background on Armanino and what it does?
Cool. So Armanino is a professional services firm of about 1,500 people, mostly based here on the West Coast. We've audit, tax, consulting services, and as I mentioned, the risk assurance and advisory practice, which covers a bunch of areas, including cyber privacy and vendor risk management. Practice is growing very, very quickly and doing lots of different things, very heavily focused on automation. But that's us.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you, Liam, for providing that overview. Moving on, I would request Nick to give a quick introduction on Wistic.
Happy to do that. So Wistic is a SaaS platform in the technology space, and we automate and streamline vendor security reviews for both the buyers and the sellers, meaning the companies assessing their vendors, as well as the vendors that need to be assessed and communicate their security and privacy posture to their customers. And so what Wistic is really focused on is how do we automate and innovate around that, which has been a largely manual process for a lot of the history of vendor security. And some of the things that we're doing that we'll talk about will help speed up and improve efficiency. And that's really what Wistic's about.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, Nick. Perfect. Thank you guys for giving that background. So now that we know a little bit about Armanino and Wistic, it's time to shift our focus and talk a little bit about how are we working together to provide seamless service to our customer. So let's again start with Liam. So Liam, can you enlighten us on how Armanino and Wistic are partnering together in this vendor security review process?
Absolutely. You know, we were hearing complaints, I guess, from two different sides of our customer base, right? The larger companies were struggling because the time to assess vendors was increasing. And they were struggling to get answers around the questions that that actually mattered to them, right? It was taking a long, long time and they didn't know what to ask. And they were having a very hard time. Lots of our startup companies, they're struggling too, right? They're getting hundreds of questionnaires. And some of these questionnaires are 400 or 500 questions long. You know, we're working with them, we're getting a SOC 2. And I also hear from them, well, it's great, we got the SOC 2, we checked that box, but now my customer is saying, that's great, but now give me my questionnaire. So all the work they're doing for the SOC 2 is not getting recognized, right? So what we wanted to do is find a partner that we could work with to innovate in this process, right? Can we make it more efficient? Can we make it more meaningful for both sides? And that's really how we can with Wistic, right? To say, is our platform and I guess in partnership where you guys are flexible enough and you have been, right, to actually work with us to say, how do we make this better for both sides? Right? Can the vendors and the startups that we work with advertise the great stuff that they're doing around security and compliance and take credit for it? And on the flip side, can the larger companies have a more efficient process? Can they leverage technology in a more efficient way? Right? Can they work with their vendors in a more meaningful way? Because also one thing we're hearing from the bigger companies is that they don't just want to assess their vendors, they want to help them. They want to make a better security environment for everybody, right? They really want to guide them through the process and work with startups and guide them in the sense of, say, you know, if you don't have a SOC 2, how do I get you into a better place through the questionnaire process? Which may sound ridiculous at times, right? Because the questionnaire process can be very impersonal. But our big companies are saying, I actually want to help these guys. And so can we leverage technology to make it better for the vendor? Or can we add some value as well? So, you know, obviously we're using the Wistic platform as we're going to market around vendor risk management, you know, and try and just help both sides of the market, right? Just to make this a much more efficient process.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you, Liam. You brought up a really good point. And the goal is, yes, not only assess the current posture, but also help companies toward their next goal. So thank you. And then now the same question goes to Nick. Nick, do you mind adding some flavor on this partnership as well?
Yeah, first of all, we're really excited about it. One of the things that we run into is even though customers can automate and streamline vendor security process on both sides of the equation with our platform, it still is a largely people-driven process. And for a lot of companies, they don't have in-house expertise. They don't have the resources or the bandwidth either to work through the backlog of vendors that need to be assessed or the incoming questionnaires that they're receiving from their customers. And so it's a very natural fit for us. And we're really excited to partner with Armanino on that front, world-class firm that has the capabilities to augment the resources that our customers have already and also to help them leverage our software all the way from being a part of that process to running the entire thing along that whole spectrum. There's a bunch of different ways we can engage, but it's a very natural fit for a lot of our customers, and that's kind of our perspective on it as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Nick, for adding your views on that. And yes, this is definitely an exciting partnership between both the companies out here. So let's go back to our slide deck, and let's talk about our roundtable discussion. So now, even before moving to our roundtable discussion, let's spend some time to talk about what is the value add or the value proposition of working with Armanino and using Wistic as a software platform too. Liam, again, would you like to share your thoughts on what are the different value proposition of working with Armanino? And then we can go to Nick or John.
As Nick had said, right, if, companies are struggling with bandwidth, how do you get all these assessments done quickly? The value proposition for any company, right, is how do we actually augment, your interior internal security program and get the work done much faster, right? This is not rocket science, but I think just having the right resources with the expertise, leveraging the right platform, it just gets the work done a lot quicker.
Perfect. Thank you, Liam. John, how about you add some perspective on this question as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the kind of the most obvious top priority from a software perspective is really the automation piece, right? So 55% I think said, hey, we're doing these assessments ourselves, but in a manual fashion, right? Wistic did a recent survey, a vendor security survey, right? And what we found was 90% of the time is kind of wasted on administration, right? And that's one of the focuses that we kind of bring and build into the platform is how do we automate some of that less valuable work, so the talent that you have on your team, right, can actually be focused on the more value-add stuff, performing a review, interacting with a vendor, identifying those risks. So I know coming from a previous organization, at a large team, we had top talent, and just it felt odd, right, that a lot of our time was spent on emailing, coordinating, following up, right? So there's a lot of examples where we actually build those administrative pieces into the platform to help with some of that automation, free up resources so your talent, they can actually focus on what you hired them to do. So that's the most obvious one. There's others, but I would hang my hat on that one.
Perfect. Thank you, John. Thank you, John and Liam, for adding your thoughts on that. And again, this is definitely an important question for companies who want to understand, the value of working with both the teams and companies over here. So now moving to our roundtable discussion, as you know, there are many companies who are new to this vendor security review process and have never conducted a third-party vendor security review. So for those companies, what do you guys think are the different approaches to the third-party risk management or assessment, and what will be your approach? John, would you like to share your thoughts on this?
Yeah, sure. So I'm kind of referring to my notes here from the survey, which was with the polling question, which was kind of telling, right? There's still a percentage of companies that aren't doing anything. Maybe that's by design, maybe that's not by design, but the way we kind of think about this is really kind of three buckets, right? No matter where you're at, that's the place to start, right? So it's first really a reactive kind of approach, which is I'm not yet fully committed to building a VRM program. I'm still dependent on the vendor to maybe report incidents or risks. I generally don't have a good transparency or visibility into that inventory. I might not be having a formal methodology on how I define my vendors when I assess them and those sorts of things. So it's kind of you're on your heels and you're really reliant on some external forces to help you get some visibility into your vendor community. That's kind of the first bucket. The second one is where I think a lot of folks on this audience is doing assessments, taking some action, but still in a manual type fashion. So you have some processes and tools in place, maybe not as fully implemented or optimized quite yet, most likely using Excel-based questionnaires, firing those off via email, interacting with your vendors via email. It's doable, but you're cobbling, maybe cobbling together a program that could potentially be much more efficient if you layer in some other processes and tools. So I think that's kind of the average, kind of where most companies are right now. There's a varying degrees within that middle bucket. But the third bucket is kind of, where we want to strive to, right? We've all seen best-in-class programs that have matured or have automated their process, right? Questionnaires or assessment processes that are more dynamic, automated, a lot of those efficiencies and interacting with vendors and delivering, some of that risk intelligence back to your business, which is the ultimate goal here, are kind of built into the process, built into the tools. You know what your requirements are, you have a good user experience as a vendor goes. And Liam hit on a great point earlier, which is focusing on the vendor, right? That's one of the things we've thought a lot about at Wistic and built that into the product to make it easier for vendors to participate in the process, which actually, allows you to arrive at a better result much more easily. So those are kind of the buckets, just very kind of general, high level, the way we think of, okay, where are you at? What's your general approach from a vendor risk?
Perfect. Thank you, John. I think you brought up a really good point about the manual process as well. And in my experience, I have seen where there is actually indeed a checklist, like an Excel spreadsheet that many companies uses, but the questions are very simple and not that standardized. And they're not typically mitigating the risk of how is the vendor protecting the data? What is the access level control? Are they backing up the data, or do they have encryption enabled? So these are very important questions when you are thinking about vendor security reviews. But again, these are manual on a manual basis. And you also mentioned about the process that vendors or clients are looking for a more easy and streamlined end-to-end process, but again, which not only saves them cost, but also helps them move this process along every year and make sure that, if there are any changes to the control or the process, they're able to tailor what they have and then implement controls around it. So perfect. Thank you, John, for adding that. Nick, would you add anything to what John just mentioned or about this question?
Yeah, I think maybe just one note to make: if you're not currently assessing third-party vendors and you're on this webinar, it's likely that something triggered that. And we see this just a lot of trends towards, whether it's regulatory reasons, whether it's a board level initiative due to remote work, or things that are, you're adopting more SaaS. Maybe it's maturity of your organization. There's a lot of different reasons why your organization might be caring about this now or in the future. And we definitely see a future in which everybody's got to care about this. But one of the things that the industry has evolved in is largely this was sort of legal, contractual based, and sort of sign on the dotted line. And just like Liam and John mentioned, we're getting to a place which is a better place, which is more of how do we help rise the tide on security, because that benefits all of us. We don't want to just check the box and pass the review and move on and the legal liability is covered. We actually want a more secure, connected environment for all of us to work together and to partner with, and the tools that we use and that touch our data. And that's really what we're going for. And so when you think about it that way, you start caring more about the actual security of your third-party vendors, or your actual security and how you communicate that to your customers, and less about just a check the box exercise. And for companies that aren't doing that today, that might mean that you need additional headcount or expertise on your team, or you might look to an Armanino or someone that can come in, right, and bring that expertise, because there's a lot of pieces that go into that process of not doing it today to automation. And it's a journey for sure, but like John mentioned, just getting started is one thing. That's a great step forward, and we see a lot of companies doing that more now than ever.
Yep, perfect. Thank you, Nick, for adding your part to this question. So I know we talked about that the companies that are still new. So let's talk about that a little bit. So as we know, vendor security might still be a new topic for some companies and a part of a process improvement for the other. So can you tell us how vendor security reviews have changed recently, and what are the different hot topics or trends that are enabling more speed and automation for vendor security. Nick, would you like to share your perspective on this question?
Yeah, sure. There's a few different things that we're seeing even in the last year or so, definitely over the last 5 years. One of them is a move to standardization. So I think everyone who's done vendor security realizes that there's about as many different variations of questions that can be asked as there are people doing vendor security. It seems that everybody has their sort of custom questionnaire or custom process, and if you're a vendor having to respond to this, it's kind of like taking, one way that it's described is taking the same exam every day from a different professor. And that sort of experience gets frustrating. You're kind of exasperated, and you need more headcount, and the result of that is not an improvement in security. It's more of a question answering exercise. And so one of the things that we're seeing is a trend towards more standardization, coalescing around standards, whether that's NIST or ISO 27001 or the Cloud Security Alliance or Shared Assessment SIG, but they're standards that have been widely adopted. And we see this transition more and more from custom, bespoke questions and assessment processes towards standardization. And that's good for everybody. So that's one trend we've seen. Another trend that we've seen is more focus on what does a vendor already have in place. So instead of just focusing on my checkbox of I got to get these 5 things, Liam alluded to this, that vendor's already got a SOC 2 audit report. Well, let's start there. Let's focus on what the auditor has validated first, and then let's fill in the gaps. In the past, that's been reversed, and it's not the right way to think about it. And so a lot of times companies are stuck in that mode. We're seeing more and more organizations get smarter about that. If an auditor spent 6 months on site with this vendor, let's start there as opposed to giving them 500 new questions to ask. So leveraging existing data, it's something that we build into our platform, into this concept that we call the trust catalog, where vendors can publish information that they already have so that the customer can start not at ground zero. But that just, using existing information is another trend that we're seeing, and that helps speed up things. And then the third trend that we're seeing really is the shift from reactive to proactive. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it from the vendor's perspective, I'm used to just answering the questions that come at me from my customers all day, every day. And they're essentially the same questions. They care about the same things. So we see more and more companies getting proactive and saying, listen, before they even send me those questions or dive into my security posture, why don't I actually communicate it to them first? Why don't I be more transparent and forward thinking and giving this information to my customers earlier on in the sales process so that we can not have this 2 to 6 week dead zone in the sales process that bogs down my entire revenue funnel. And so that's an interesting trend that we're seeing more and more. And we see a future in which everybody's got to shift to that proactive model because there's not enough headcount out there to not do that. And so that would be the third thing that we've seen kind of a major trend in the industry as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Nick. And you brought up a really good point about the reactive and versus proactive approach. And as you know, security right now is getting a lot of consideration, and every company is, focusing on how is their data being protected. How is vendor protecting their data? So they want to look at what is the current state of security controls they have, but do give the benefit of what they currently have and use that toward their assessment, but also being very proactive and say, okay, these are all the risks out there from a vendor standpoint. This is what I have mitigated so far, and we have some residual risk. So these are what should we do to mitigate those risks? So they're becoming very proactive in these areas as well. So thank you, Nick. Liam, would you like to add some flavor to what Nick just mentioned?
Yeah, I guess focusing on the last point that you brought up, Nick, I think we're seeing a lot more CISOs getting involved in the sales cycle than before. How are they having those conversations proactively with potential customers to answer those questions early in that process, right? Do we have to wait till the questionnaire comes out, or can we get the CISO involved to be very proactive? and we're seeing that as being very, very different. We're also seeing a lot more focus, I think, on fourth-party risk management, right? Really thinking through, your vendors, and how are you identifying those up front as well, right? We're seeing more and more in the news around issues caused by fourth parties, and so how are companies now proactively thinking about that, and in fact, making sure they're assessing the vendors very proactively, which is again a change. It was all very, very active before. Thankfully, I think things are changing and changing pretty fast. As you guys are seeing, the checklists are becoming much more onerous. So how do we just help our customers get more proactive in this area? So I think it's an exciting time. Things are definitely changing.
Yep, yep, it is. It is. Thank you, Liam, for sharing your thoughts over here. So yeah, knowing about these trends definitely helps in enabling more speed and automation of vendor security. Now let's shift our focus and talk a little bit about the different techniques and methodologies used by both the teams and how we can integrate them to the customer security program. Liam, maybe you can share us your experience on what techniques and methodology Armanino is using and how are we integrating these with Wistic?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm seeing. Certainly our clients are using, and they really are stepping back and taking a holistic view, I think, of risk management and just security across their organization. And where does the vendor fit into that? And also I'm thinking much more these days around how is that going to impact the vendor? I mean, to the points the guys made earlier, right? This is becoming more around rising the tide around security, right? How do we make sure we build a program where everybody is more secure? And so I think that's really made a big shift in the industry recently, right? Where we are using tools, and to John's point earlier, we're using more dynamic intake of vendors. So instead of saying, here's my standardized questionnaire for everybody, let's ask some questions up front to really scope that assessment properly. Do they have a SOC 2? And if they don't, how do we make sure we're leveraging maybe a standard questionnaire with some of the SOC 2 elements mapped so that the vendor is getting some value from that questionnaire? I had a conversation with a vendor a couple of days ago, and we were engaged by a very big company to come in and speak with them. And the vendor's question to me was, well, what do I get out of this? Where's my value from doing all this work? I don't have to answer these questions, right? I don't have a SOC 2. We were able to explain, well, thankfully we have a questionnaire that's mapped to SOC 2. So it's like a mini readiness assessment you're doing, right? You're not paying for it from your side, I guess, right? But you're getting some value from doing this questionnaire. And we're seeing more and more companies thinking like that, right? How do we actually help our vendors get better? And so, doing that along with a very defined process, right? This is very repeatable, right? We got clients who are doing hundreds and thousands of these, right? So how do you do this at scale? And so doing it manually is very, very challenging, right? So how do you leverage technology to have a very transparent, well-defined process, including monitoring of remediation items, right? You do the assessment, but then what then? What do you do with that information, right? If you've got all these gaps that have to be fixed, how do you track that manually, right? Or can you leverage a tool, not only to be making sure the vendor's doing the right thing, but also check in with the vendor, right? We can all wait and say, okay, the deadline's tomorrow, what have you done? But, is there a better process for leveraging technology? And what we will do with a lot of our clients is we're doing the reach out on behalf of our clients to the vendor to say, you know what, 2 months down the line, you have this deadline. What can we do? Can we answer your questions? Right? Are you struggling in this area? I think it's a better environment for everybody if we're acting like that. And that's in your methodology just around communication, externally and also across the business internally. So, again, I think things are changing in a much better way.
Yeah. No, Liam, I think that was right on point. I know you brought up a really good point about issue management. And that's the key piece, right? We can assess the security posture. We know what the control the company has. But if for any findings that are identified, okay, what is the recommendation? What do you prefer? Where can we, make sure that our control are not only designed, but also operating effectively, throughout the period. So you're also looking at the issue management exercise, making sure that the companies are looking at what they're doing, how are they assessing the risk and they're remediating this issue on a timely basis. Perfect. John, would you like to share your thoughts on this as well?
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the biggest techniques that I'm seeing that has had real success is, I have to go back to like the standardization, which is kind of the trend. Typically what we see is enterprises have a lot of what I call just legacy baggage of third-party risk policy. Like, hey, why are we even asking 500 questions? Well, it's part of our standard, and that was established, 5 or 10 years ago after a breach. Well, what we're seeing when some of these enterprises start working with their peers and some organizations that are starting to standardize, not just around a framework like NIST, but actually maybe taking NIST and looking at a particular vertical like healthcare or financial services. They're actually working with their peers to come up with a solution that works for everybody, right? A standard, a set of questions. We see it in a couple of different verticals where when they do that, it's actually helping them internally to kind of change their program for the better, make it more lean, make it more manageable, right? So they have kind of a, they have a point to make internally to say, my peers focus on this, or our peers focus on this set of key controls. Why are we going above and beyond that? It's a healthy challenge, and I've seen it have a lot of success in kind of paring down a program to something that's much more efficient and doable from a vendor perspective. So I would definitely highlight the standardization trend. That is huge. The other thing I would add is, there's huge value in, building a lean program, right? And not just copying something that's best of breed in a different vertical that may have other, objectives, other regulatory, challenges that kind of drive that program, right? So that's the beauty of, working with an Armanino, is that we can tailor some of those approaches from a program perspective and build those into the software, which enables that from a process standpoint. So
Yep.
really good success, in some of the partners that we've taken that.
One note on that, Vishal, as well, just to tag on what John was saying, is for those who answered no in the poll, what that means is that it makes it pretty straightforward to stand up a program, even if you haven't done anything. And so, especially with this trend towards standardization, it means you don't have to have the expertise to go write your own questions or topics that you should care about. You can rely upon the collective intelligence of, for example, 10,000 plus companies at the Cloud Security Alliance that have already done that work on cloud vendors. And you can leverage that and just sort of plug it into a process. And whether you engage, you need additional assistance, and Armanino comes in and consults on that or helps you get it off the ground. You should be, when we talk to our new customers, you should be assessing vendors within 30 days. And we're talking about days and weeks, not months or years to stand this up. And that's really important today when companies have to get on this fast and the backlog continues to grow and there's all sorts of pressures on a business perspective, and you don't want to slow that down. So that's just an important point. If, someone may be listening and saying, well, I don't have all this expertise, I don't have all this. We're not talking about like a year-long process to get this launched. This is something that you can, once you have buy-in from the business perspective, you can actually get this up and running pretty quickly.
Yep, Nick. Yes, thank you so much, Nick, for chiming in. And yes, I think everyone brought a good point over here. One of the point that I would like to just highlight is the lean program. I've seen that if a company has like 20 controls and the other companies are looking at that and asking, hey, why do we have 20 controls? But I think they're also challenging and saying that, hey, let's have more stringent controls. Let's not do 20 for 20. Let's go to 50 controls and see where are we at in that landscape. But again, it's about the company and what they are trying to do as well. And so I know we talked a lot about standardization, optimization. We talked about the lean program. So keeping that into consideration, let's talk a little bit about how we can establish a repeatable process that not only reduces the cost of the company, as that is one of our main consideration, but also simplify the end-to-end vendor assessment. Liam, would you like to share your viewpoint on how we can establish a repeatable process?
Yeah, absolutely. Nick, you made a good point. It has been days as we're working with new clients to get them up and running, and it's not underestimating the amount of work that's involved. But I think leveraging technology, it can be done these days, right? We've worked with clients where we're beginning by determining who should be involved, right? Is it procurement? Are we bringing in information security? What are the right folks that we want that are going to be involved in the process going forward to make sure we're getting appropriate buy-in? It's not everybody, right? We want to make sure we're very judgmental, I guess, in some respects on who we bring in. But get the right folks involved, inventory the vendors, right? How do you do that, right? You're working with finance or legal or, user access reviews to find your systems. There's different ways to do that, but, getting that list of vendors to begin with, developing a dynamic process around how do you identify which vendors you're going to assess, right? How are you going to classify risk? Is it going to be based upon the access that they have to your data? Or is there some other key element in your supply chain you're thinking about, right? So normally the clients will work when they're starting up a program, they're not assessing everybody. They're saying, okay, let's take this risk-based approach. Let's start with the first 50 vendors, or whatever that number is, right? Just to get the process going, and then building that into technology around the questions to assess them up front to say, how many questions am I going to ask you from a security perspective, depending on the answers you give me, right? What access do you have, for example? So, right, you're building it all into the technology. The questionnaire goes out leveraging technology. The responses come back. The documents are attached, leveraging technology, right? The issues are all being tracked in the system, right? Everything is in that one place. Makes it so much easier, right? That's how you define, I believe, and build a repeatable process at scale. And you can have the expertise looking at the evidence that's coming back, but again, just how do you make it really efficient, where there's not documents flying over and back, to your point, John, around emails going back and forth and phone calls, etc. How do you avoid that? Are there just ways that you can make it easier? Another way that we're seeing to make it a little bit more streamlined is outside of technology, how are you communicating with the vendor up front to make sure hopefully they're seeing the value from the process and you're answering their questions, right? So they feel that there's something that they're actually involved in, because one of the biggest, challenges what we've seen and we've seen for a long time is just how long it takes a vendor to respond when they're struggling to respond. So how do you actually identify that they're struggling and actually reach out and have a conversation and say, where can we help? Let's get on a call, let's answer some of your questions, and let's get this process moving. That's what's worked for us.
Perfect. Thank you, Liam, for adding that, response on that. John, the same question on your side. What would you like to add, on this question, and anything to add on to Liam's point?
Yeah, I would say, a standard but flexible workflow is absolutely essential, right? So when we say standard, we don't mean the same every time, right?
Yep.
It means we have a workflow and a process that's built into the technology and the platform that can be flexible. So for example, we're working with a client alongside Liam and his team that we're not sure where they fall in the maturity scale. We have no idea where their program is at, but we have a standard workflow that's built into the platform that's malleable, right? Where we can turn pieces up or off or, on, depending on where they're at. Maybe they have, established an inventory and they've established their criticality. Okay, that piece, we can leave that piece alone in the platform, but they need more workflow on standardizing the actual review process and identification of issues, right? The big thing is every client is different, and having a standard but flexible workflow that's already kind of integrated into the software, I think is key. We've already seen a lot of success in just having that flexibility and not having something that's rigid and enforcing process or a workflow on a client that's really not ready for it, or it really doesn't make sense for where they're at.
Yep. Thank
One
you.
other thought on that, Michelle, as well, is you can think about this in terms of who am I assessing, when am I assessing them, and how am I assessing them? And Liam talked about kind of the inventory of my existing vendors, so that's part of the who, and then is it based on their data or risks? So that's kind of the who bucket. The when is an interesting one, and that's definitely a key piece of the repeatable process that John was talking about. And this is a roadblock that we see a lot of companies hit, which is they decide to start assessing vendors, and then all of a sudden every vendor needs to be assessed. And maybe you do like a blast email to all of your vendors, hey, we're going to assess you now. But if I'm the vendor and maybe we just renewed our contract with you, maybe we just finished the sales process, why would I do that now versus then, right? And so the when actually is one of the most important pieces of that process. So timing it with the sales motion or the buying motion, right? Let's do it early on in the purchasing process and not after we just signed a contract for them, because the vendor is going to be a lot more likely to engage with us before money is exchanged, for example. And then when you renew that, in the future, let's reassess right before the renewal happens and not after. Again, timing it up. So some of those things about the when can be really important. And the process that you establish, even if it's just, hey, moving forward, if you want to buy something at our company, you've got to email information security. They've got to review that vendor. That's how a lot of companies start. It's just a policy. We're going to start assessing vendors and go from there. But that's honestly one of the biggest hurdles that we see with companies, is getting that policy or that process established, that we are now assessing our vendors before we do business with them. And of course, it's gonna vary depending on what that vendor's doing for us. So that's kind of the who and the when, and then the how is all the stuff that we've been talking about, the methodology, the standards and things. But those are kind of three of the key buckets that you've got to figure out in order to have a repeatable process.
Perfect. Thank you, Nick. I think you brought up a really good point, and that's a bullseye about the when part. And I've seen that, for many companies who are doing their SOC or SOC assessment, they do have a process for vendor onboarding process. So when they are having these vendors, some of them are also performing this vendor security process, in the starting itself, to basically choose, okay, if I'm selecting this vendor, does this vendor has enough security controls? And because that vendor will be hosting the data. So many companies are doing that in the forefront as well. And that is what we need to, look at as well. So again, thank you for, providing your thoughts on this. So based on what we have learned so far in this webinar, it's time for our, last set of polling questions, and then we can open the conversation for some Q&A from our audience. Perfect. So our third polling question is, who should care about vendor risk assessment? Is it business owner? Option 1. Option 2 is security teams. Option 3, procurement teams. Option 4, vendor management team. And option 5, all of the above. So let's give some time for our audience to participate. All right, almost close, guys. We're just waiting for the last 10 seconds before we reveal the answer.
Is this a trick question, Vishal?
It is, it seems like everyone's going to be a millionaire today. So it's all of the above. So yes, it's everyone has to be involved. Everyone is equally, responsible and accountable, and should care about assessing their vendor risk. So good job, guys. So let's move on to our fourth polling question. All right. So what is a key risk from not assessing your vendor at least annually? And this is a tricky one. The vendor has security gaps that impact your organization. The vendor is not equipped to continue support. You face reputational and legal risk if you're not doing it. Or the last one, all of the above. So we'll again give some time for our audience to participate. All right, we have 10 more seconds to go before we reveal the answer. Perfect. So the answer is, all of the above. If you're not assessing your vendor on a periodic basis, then you are likely to face all the above mentioned risks. And again, these risks are these are the risks that you should be, we should be thinking about when we are looking at our risk assessment, our risk register. Okay, what is vendor assessment will have an impact on? What are the underlying risks? So again, all the three risks are very critical in terms of when you're not assessing your vendor on a periodic basis. So, thank you everyone for participating in the polling question. Now, let's do a quick time check. All right, so we still have 10 minutes. So let's take this remaining 5 to 10 minutes and open up our conversation for our audience for their questions. I would request the audience to post your question in the chat window so that we can answer some of your questions.
Actually, Vishal, while we're waiting for some questions, just on the last polling question, what we're hearing more and more from clients is, in addition to security and privacy being a big issue, it's just a continuity of support. Right? With COVID-19 and all that's happened in the last 6 months, we're having more clients reach out to their vendors around, how are you doing? How's business going? Will you still be around? How are your BCP plans? Can you work remotely? All these questions that are coming up as a result of the pandemic. Many of our clients are also stepping back and saying vendor risk management is not the biggest priority, and we understand that, right? In the middle of this situation, as companies are trying just to stay in business, so we're seeing obviously the increase in risk. And the other work that we do, for example, on the SOC 2 side, we're seeing more and more exceptions and issues because people are working remotely, and again, people are just trying to get through this time, which is very, very challenging for many, many people, right? So, the level of issues that we're seeing, it continues to increase. So it just reiterates, I guess, the importance of the stuff we're talking about today, but also, I guess, how can we help companies, right? How can we reach out proactively to them, see how they're doing, see how people are doing, so we can all help each other. But, we're definitely seeing more focus recently.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Liam. And then to add on to this, we have one question from our attendees. So the question is, we deal with a lot of government agencies and financial institutions, and they like to provide their own security questionnaire. How open are these entities to the output of the automated system that we are talking about, like Wistic?
I can talk to that.
Yep.
John can chime in. Yeah, so this is a part of that trend that we're seeing. So more and more, they are more open than not on this topic. This is where the selection of the standards that you align with matters. So for example, if I understand this question correctly, it sounds like this company is a vendor selling to government agencies or financial institutions, and they're receiving questions from these entities, and they've experienced that same thing that everybody has, which is I get custom questions from them. For example, if we're selling into government, one of the standards that we support on our platform, and there's over a dozen of them, is the NIST framework that John referenced, and that's a government standard. And so one of the things is just understanding how the audience that you're communicating to is going to interpret your position. And so certainly in that scenario, they would be familiar with, and it's likely, and this is something that we see, it's very likely that most of their questions actually come from that standard. It's not that people are inventing these questions, there's a lot of just cut and paste that goes on. And so that's one thought. In addition, from a financial perspective, there are other standards that financial institutions care more about. And so leveraging an Armanino or a Wistic and the standardized approach is a lot about understanding who you're selling to and the things that they're going to care about. And that's something that we have deep expertise in collectively to be able to address that challenge. And certainly as you're more transparent with those potential customers, and as you're more upfront about here's the status of our program, the trust that they have in you earlier on in the sales process only grows. And that's really kind of at the heart of what we're speaking to, is just getting your information out there and addressing it earlier as opposed to later and reacting to it. It greases the wheels and eliminates a lot of the delay in the sales process as well. So those are a few thoughts that I had on that.
Perfect. Thank you, Nip. And I hope this answers our audience question. And we have another, very interesting question is, would there be a conflict of interest if we were to partner with Armanino and Wistic and have them continue to conduct our SOC audits?
It's an excellent question. We've worked with clients where we do the SOC 2, we're independent. When we're doing the questionnaires, we're also independent. And so all professional practices say there is no conflict of interest because we take that mindset when we're doing the work on both sides, right? Because what we want to do is be able to give assurance to both the vendor and to the customer that they've got an independent third party coming in and actually helping them and giving that kind of lens, an external lens, to make sure they've got the right controls in place. So we've done in the past without any independence issues.
Perfect. Thank you, Liam. And again, the SOC audit is again more focused on the security, availability, and confidentiality of the company itself and what are their security controls. And the vendor assessment is more on what is their vendor doing, how are they protecting the data, and how is the vendor and the company, what kind of security posture they have. So, okay, then we have another, common question that we have been talking about and we have been receiving so far is what are some of the biggest challenges when it comes to vendor security review process? Nick, would you like to answer that question?
Yeah, I think for somebody starting a program up, maybe you're not doing it today, or maybe you have something and you want to take it to the next level. One of the things that we see as one of the biggest challenges is just developing a business-friendly process. The whole reason why you're assessing your vendor's security is so that your business can be secure and you could generate more profit, revenue, do more business with customers. And sometimes we lose sight of that. And so we see companies go either way overboard or way the other direction. So that's one piece, is making sure that it's business friendly. That's the same challenge on the vendor side. If you're answering questions from your customers, you're likely getting complaints from your business teams that you're too slow. You're slowing down revenue, you're slowing down sales. And that's why this whole concept of getting out ahead of it, instead of answering questions from your customers, publishing your information to them before they ever ask you for it, helps to streamline that. So that would be one of the challenges. I think another one that we, is obviously one of the purposes of the call today is that you don't have the expertise in-house to actually do this. And that's again where Armanino can come in and help leverage that and take you from a place of maybe you have great IT or other skill sets in your company already, but not on this side of things. They can augment that and leverage that. And that typically, we hear so frequently, we're waiting for someone to be hired to start this. That's probably not the right way to think about it. If it's an important enough topic to start doing things today, and you can start small. But those are a couple of key challenges that we see.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Nick. So yeah, so with this, we are, coming to the top of the hour, and we are toward the end of our webinar session as well. I would like to thank all our panelists for their time today and their valuable advice or vendor security assessment. For some of the questions that we were not able to answer today, we'll definitely get back to you guys with the answer. And last but not the least, I would like to thank our wonderful audience for not only attending our webinar, but also participating in our polling questions and our open Q&A session. We hope you find this information helpful, and please do reach out to us and let us know in case of any questions. Thank you everyone again, and have a great rest of your day. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.